So now I'm going to show you how to cut your dovetails using your handsaw. This is my preferred handsaw, but you can use pretty much any handsaw you feel comfortable with. Before I attack my dovetails or even start to cut things, even on a practice one, I'm going to do a little bit of handsawing to try to get my body warmed up and get used to the motions that I want it to get, I want it to perform. If I don't do that, I jump right in, I run the risk that I'm going to hit my lines or cut on the wrong side of a line, and I'm not going to be very happy with that. So, let's see if I can get a better angle so you can see what I'm doing. So, I am going to start, and I'm going to start sawing on this side, and I'm going to saw all of the lines that are angled this direction. Once I get through all of this, even if I have a 20-inch wide panel, then I'm going to be able to flip the saw and cut the other angle. If I try to waffle back and forth, odds are pretty good I'm going to cut something wrong and be starting over. So I prefer to do it this way. If you find that you like to tilt the saw back and forth, that is totally your decision. I find I'm more accurate if I saw everything that's facing one direction and then flip it to the other one. It'll make a little bit more sense also when we're cutting the pins, because I won't have to keep repositioning my body quite so much. So I want to make sure that when I'm sawing that I am not sawing right on those lines. I like to leave my layout lines, that way if I miss them I can fix something. If I saw right on my layout lines and I cut through them, then I have no idea whether I'm actually where I want or if I'm varying just a little bit. So I want to cut on the X side of my lines. So I'm going to use my thumb to position this where I want it. And you can start with the saw tilted up, get the saw started, and then bring it down across the line. I've been trained to just go for it and get it started all in one push. That takes a little bit of practice, but you can get to that point. So now that I've got a saw curve, I want to now pay attention to what angle I'm sawing at. If I'm a little bit off on the tails, that is okay, because I'm going to be fitting my pin board to exactly what I cut on the tail board. The only thing that is super important on this is that this is perfectly perpendicular across. I'm going to slow down when I get towards the bottom because I want to touch my scribe line. I don't want to cut through them. If I get through it, then I'm going to see that. It's not so important on the inside of my box or my drawer because generally people aren't looking inside or underneath things. However, I want to try to be as careful as possible. All right, so I've got that one touching the scribe lines on both sides. I'm gonna get this one going. You will probably find that you are more comfortable sawing one direction or the other. Another thing you can do is if you aren't comfortable tilting the saw, you can grab your board and tilt it so that those lines are vertical and you just have to concentrate on sawing straight down. So now I'm going to start over here and staying on my waist side while I'm trying to. It is helpful sometimes to clear the sawdust off of the board because it obscures your lines, your layout lines. So just give it a blow to get some of that out of the way. So don't think that if you're sawing away and you notice that you're drifting away from your line, that you're going to be able to physically force this saw to go the angle that you want. If you start going at a strange angle, if the angle is less steep and so it's running into your waste piece, you can always just finish that cut or abandon that cut and then restart and just very slowly work on creating a new curve at the angle that you want. If it's going into your save pieces or the tails themselves, you're basically just going to be changing the angle of that tail. You can make both of them match by correcting it after you finish sawing, or you can use your chisel and try to correct things. I prefer to try to do everything from the saw just because I'm more comfortable with that. All right, so now that we've sawed all of those, we still have these two pieces that we can remove with a regular dovetail saw. So I'm actually just going to trim these guys off. I'm going to stay a little bit away from my line. There we go. I'm going to stay away from my scribe line a little bit, that way I have some to chisel off. So I need to clamp this in my vise. I'm going to spin it around because I prefer to saw with the waste on my left. I'm going to clamp this fairly far down in the vise just because I need it to try to be in line with the clamping pressure. And staying away from my line, go ahead and trim this off. Again, I want to slow down when I start feeling, or when I feel like I'm about to cut through, because if I just go to town and keep sawing, I'm going to damage the sides of my tails. There's one. And there's two. Now I did leave myself a little bit of material if I was feeling a little bit more confident in my sawing techniques today. I would have sawed right on the lines, but it's just been one of those days. So now I'm ready to remove this excess material in there. There are, again, several different ways that we can handle that. The way I'm going to show you is just using the chisel. You can also use a coping saw or a fret saw or a jeweler saw with a nice thin blade to remove most of this. If you're at the bandsaw cutting these, you can use the bandsaw to clear most of it out. You will eventually have to come in with a chisel to clean it up. You will not get a nice clean surface from the bandsaw. You will not get a clean enough surface using a fret saw. Stay a little away from your lines and then work your way in. I'm just going to use a chisel because I don't have a fret saw or a coping saw with a narrow enough blade. So I want to always start with my show face facing down. That way when I break through, when I've removed most of this material, when I break through, if I gouge something or if my chisel's tilted at a funky angle, I'm not going to do damage to the face. It's going to be damaging the outside, or not the outside, the inside. We always want to keep the ugly on the inside. So I found a chisel that is a little bit narrower than the piece I'm trying to remove. You need to pay attention to, if you only have a 1/2 inch chisel sharp, you want to make sure that you can fit your 1/2 inch chisel in here. I'm staying a little bit away from my line. I'm going to say about a 1/16. And I'm going to give it one good whack to set it, and then a whack to drive it down. Now what I'm going to do is take and butt this up against my bench hook here and take my narrower chisel that fits through here and just tap and remove that wedge of material. I've got to reposition myself. Now I'm going to take, and I need to go a little bit deeper with this, so again, 1 to set it, 1 to do my cutting. When I am popping chips out like this, I want to make sure that I'm not being super greedy. I don't want to try to cut any deeper popping the chips out through the end grain than I was when I chiseled down. If I start digging too far down, I run the risk of tearing pieces off or splitting things, so I want to chisel down in approximately the same amount. I want to remove by tapping the chisel in from the end grain. That's just going to split it out, and it's actually super fun. So I'm going to go a little bit less than halfway from this face. And keep going back and forth. You can see that the bevel is facing up on my 1/4-inch chisel, the one going in from the end grain. You could do it bevel down, but I have more control with the bevel up. Because if it starts hogging away too much material and I need to adjust the angle of cut, it's a whole lot easier to do with the bevel up. So as I'm chiseling, you might be able to see that my chisel is kind of automatically started angling a little bit that direction. So my handle is sticking a little bit towards the end of my tails. That is perfectly okay. I actually want to do what's called an undercut, which is remove more material at the center of my board than at the edges or at the faces. That makes it so that when I go to put this all together, I'm only touching on those shoulders. I don't have any high spots in the middle to create problems. That's personal preference. Some people want it to be perfectly square across. I just don't spend that amount of time trying to make that perfect. So I've gone about as far as I want to from the inside of my piece. Now I can flip it over and go from the face, or the show face. So again, staying about a 1/16 of an inch away. I usually turn the board. That time I didn't, because I know that the chisel is going to start tilting toward or away from my scribe line. I'm not super concerned, and I'm not right on my scribe line. Anytime I'm chiseling right on my scribe line, I'm going to have the chisel so that I can see the back of it. So instead of having it with the back facing that direction, I'm going to have it facing this way so that I can see what's going on. See if it's square. Got a little greedy there. All right, I am almost ready to poke through, so I kind of want to be a little bit more gentle here. Poplar likes to tear out in the middle. Quite a bit more than other woods might. I prefer to do most of my chiseling and then switch to a super sharp set of chisels. but I only have one set of chisels today, so now I've popped out that chip. Now I can go back. I'm going to again start from my inside piece, or my inside face. And I'm actually going to, if I have too much material out here, I'm going to remove most of the waste and then set the chisel in the scribe line. At this point, I'm fairly confident that it is right where I need it. So I set it right in the scribe line and gently tap it down. If I have too much material back here towards the scribe line and I go and pound this in, it's actually going to take and shove my scribe line back a little bit. These are pretty sharp chisels and poplar, so I can be a little bit more aggressive. If I was trying to chisel this in ash or hickory, I would be moving this back in 64th inch increments back towards the scribe line. So on the front side, I had a little bit more material left, so I'm actually going to take it in 2 passes. One to get rid of most of it, and this one to get right in this. All right, so now that I've gotten all of that material out in here, I can take and choke up on my chisel and clean up any gunk that might be in this area. I'm going to choke up on this chisel, ooh, there we go, quite a bit. I want to make sure that if I slip, this is not going to actually go through the wood and into my hand. Notice I'm holding way the heck back here. I'm not holding up here and then trying to chisel. That is how emergency room visits happen. So I'm just trying to get a little bit of gunk out. If you don't feel comfortable with this, always clamp it down. When in doubt, clamp it down. If you hear a little voice in the back of your head saying, maybe I should clamp this, do it. All right, so everything looks nice and clean in there. Now all I need to do before I can start worrying about my pin board is cleaning up these shoulders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come from the sides and I'm going to chisel straight down, and then I'm going to turn this on its side and come from the end. Then I'm going to have a tiny little bit of material on these corners that I can then nip off with the chisel really quickly. So I'm going to start here, and because I left so little material, I am paring across the grain, so it's going to be a little bit rougher of a ride than going with the grain, which all of this has been paring across the grain, but I can do this just using my body weight. I'm going to take my hammer and just gently tap down. And again, it is okay if I undercut a little bit. I want to stop before I start digging too much into those pins or into those tails. So now you can kind of see I have just cut a trough right there. That's the width of my chisel. I think it's undercut a little bit, which is what I want. So now I can go to the other side and get this end done. If my chisels aren't sharp, this process is going to be miserable. It's going to also be incredibly dangerous. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping these chisels nice and tuned. It doesn't take nearly as long once you've done the flattening of the backs of your chisels to do the tips or to do the bevels. I can do all 10 of mine, even if I have to hollow grind in less than 2 hours. And with hollow grinding, that adds quite a bit of time. But if I just need to tune up the bevels, I can do that in about half an hour for 8 chisels. So there is no excuse for not keeping them sharp. They are much, much safer. You are less likely to cause some serious damage. If you do cut yourself, it's going to be a nice clean cut instead of a nice jagged cut from something that's nasty and a little bit rusty. Probably not rusty, but you know what I mean. So I'm going to do the same thing coming from the sides. Now you can see what I've done. I've cleaned out most of the stuff over there. I now need to come in from this side. Ooh, no, there we go. I've cleaned out that side, and now I need to come in from this side and remove that material. Then I've got these little nubs and a little bit of cleanup to do right here at the intersection between the tail and the shoulder. As you can see, whenever I'm tapping down, this keeps going through. That's why I have the bench hook down. Here at the school, we want to make sure that we are preserving our benches. At home, I spent enough time and energy building that bench that I protect it better than I would protect pretty much anything else I own. So just keep in mind, this is replaceable. It's easy to fix. This workbench that costs a heck of a lot more than a scrap piece of wood is not as easy to fix. All right. So now on all edges, I just have to hit these 4 corners. And to do that, I'm going to clamp it vertically in the vise right over here. So follow me down. So I have this secured incredibly tight in this here vise. I'm going to take my wider chisel just because I feel I control it a little bit more than my 1/4" one. And I'm basically just going to set this chisel in my scribe line. And I can start from the inside and work my way out, or start from the outside and work my way in. I find I have more control if I start on the inside and just nibble away. Just like that. Now I'm going to go nip a little bit of material that I needed to out of that corner. There we go. And do the same on this side. You want to have this clamped pretty well, because you're putting force in a way that the vise doesn't want to necessarily hold. At least these vices, they've had a long, hard life. Sometimes they don't want to grab things as hard as we want them to. So you just have to clamp the living snot out of it. So again, starting from the inside, working my way out. And that last pass to get that last little bit of material should be about less than 1/16 of an inch. All right, and everything looks good. So before I transfer my marks onto my pin board, I want to go through and check to make sure everything's nice and square. If you have a nice thin square or a nice narrow square, it's going to work just fine. I'm just going to do it by eye. Everything looks nice and clean. I don't see a bunch of gunk. Actually, now that I say that, there is a little bit of gunk in there. There we go. Anytime I'm chiseling, I want to try to, as much as I can, to chisel from both sides. That way I don't get blowout on either side. But sometimes I do go all the way through. So I always want to make sure that I am chiseling from the front towards the back, or from the outside towards the inside. So now we are ready for cutting or laying out our pins.